Hello, friends, and welcome to Sleep Tight Stories. This story was originally published in Sleep Tight Premium. To listen to more stories like this, please visit sleeptightpremium.com and subscribe. That's sleeptightpremium.com. Thank you. This is a story about a boy who thought he had everything he needed. He had money, food, and a magic wishing cap. But he was lonely. He wished for a friend and companion, and so wished himself off to find the most beautiful and kindest princess he could. But when he got there, she wanted nothing to do with him. What is he going to do now? The Magic Apples. Once upon a time, there was a boy who was better off than others. He was never short of money, for he had a purse which was never empty. He was never short of food, for he had a tablecloth on which, as soon as he spread it, he found all that he wanted to eat and drink. And besides, he had a magic wishing cap. When he put it on, he could wish himself wherever he wanted, and there he would be, that very moment. There was only one thing he didn't have. He had no companion, and he was gradually coming into the years when it would be necessary for him to find one. As he was walking sadly along one fine day, it occurred to him that he could wish himself where he would find the most beautiful, caring princess in the world. No sooner had he thought of it than there he was. It was a land which he had never yet seen, and a city in which he had never been yet. And the king had a daughter, so accomplished that he had never yet met anyone like her, and he wanted to be her friend on the spot. But she would have nothing to do with him. Finally, he was so sad and so beside himself that he could no longer be where she was not. So he took his magic cap and wished himself into the castle. He wanted to say goodbye, so he said. And she laid her hand in his. "I wish we were far beyond the end of the world," he said. And there they were. But the king's daughter cried and begged to be allowed to go home again. He could have all the gold and silver in the castle in return. "I have enough money for myself," he said, and he shook his purse so that money just rolled about. He could sit down at the royal table and eat the finest food, she said. "I have enough to eat and drink myself," he said. "See, you can sit down at the table," he said, and at once he spread his tablecloth. And there stood a table covered with the best one might wish, and the king himself ate no better. After they had eaten, the king's daughter said, "Oh, look at the beautiful apples up there on the tree. If you were really kind, you would fetch me a couple of them." The boy was not lazy, and so he climbed up. But he had forgotten his tablecloth and his purse, and she took these. And while he was shaking down the apples, his cap fell off. She at once put it on and wished herself back in her own room. And there she was that minute. "You might have known," said the boy to himself, and hurried down from the tree. He began to cry and did not know what to do. And as he was sitting there, he sampled the apples which he had thrown down. No sooner had he tried one than he had a strange feeling in his head, and when he looked more closely, he had a pair of horns. "Well, now it can do me no more harm," he said, and calmly went on eating the apples. But suddenly, the horns had disappeared, and he was as before. "Good enough," he said. And with that, he put the apples in his pocket and set out to search for the king's daughter. He went from city to city and sailed from country to country. But it was a long journey and lasted a year and a day, and even longer. But one day he got there after all, and he found out that the king's daughter was at the library. Then he sat himself down with his apples before the library door and pretended to be a peddler. "Apples from abroad, apples from abroad," he cried. And sure enough, the king's daughter came and told her maidens to go and see what desirable things the peddler from abroad might have to offer. Yes, he had apples from abroad. "What do the apples give one?" asked the maiden. "Wisdom and beauty," said the peddler, and the maiden bought them. When the king's daughter had eaten from the apples, she had a pair of horns, and there was such a wailing in the castle that it was sad to hear. And the castle was saddened, and in the whole kingdom an announcement was made that whoever could help the king's daughter should be able to ask her for her friendship and receive half the kingdom besides. Then Tom, Dick, and Harry, and the best doctors in the country came along, but none of them could help the princess. But one day, a foreign doctor from away came to court. He was not from their country, he said, and had made the journey to try his luck here. But he must see the king's daughter alone, he said, and so permission was granted to him. The king's daughter recognized him and grew red and pale in turn. "If I help you now, will you be friends with me?" asked the boy. Yes, indeed, she would. Then he gave her one of the magic apples, and her horns were only half as large as before. "But I cannot do any more until I have my cap, my tablecloth, and my purse back again," he said. So she went and brought him the things. Then he gave her still another magic apple, and now the horns were no more than tiny horns. "But now I cannot go on until you promise that you will be a true friend to me," he said. And she promised that she would. And after she had eaten the third apple, her forehead was quite smooth again, and she was even more beautiful than before. Then there was great joy in the castle. The two became great friends, and after some time, they decided to marry. The castle prepared for the wedding with baking and invited people from east and west to come to it. And they ate and celebrated and were merry and of good cheer. And that's the end of our story. Good night.